That's fine. Okay.
Greetings, brothers. My name is Ralph Williams of Hyattsville, Landover, alumni chapter of Kappa Alpha Psi, the Eastern Province, and I am here with Brother Winfred Mundle, the esteemed Winfred Mundle, former General Counsel for the entire fraternity, former Eastern Province General Counsel, as well as Elder Watson Diggs awardee. Thank you for your time, Brother Mundle.
Thank you, brother.
Right.
Thank you for the invitation.
Of course, of course. Now we're going to start. Basically, you're a very esteemed member of our fraternity, and I guess we'll just start from the beginning. Before you pledged, tell us about your life. And I knew you grew up in South Carolina, correct?
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I grew up in the most, I think, fascinating point about my beginning is my mother and father were living here in Washington.
Mm-hmm.
On Rhode Island Avenue,
Okay.
Northwest, 900 block. I even know that. I'll tell you one day how I learned all of those things. And she was pregnant,
Mm-hmm.
and within about 3 or 4 weeks before it was time for her to deliver,
Mm-hmm.
I was going to be the first child. She went back to South Carolina because she was from South Carolina also, and
Mm-hmm.
spent the next several weeks with her mother and father-in-law.
Mm-hmm.
My father stayed on up here because he was working in Washington.
Okay.
So that's how I came into the world in Columbia, South Carolina. Then a couple of weeks or a month later, I came back to Washington.
Okay.
And then shortly afterwards, my father got a job with North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company.
Right.
As an agent in 1932.
Okay.
And about that time, my brother Eugene Mundle, the late Eugene Mundle,
Mm-hmm.
former Beta Row, 1949, and Washington alumni in Richmond and different things. He was born, and they moved to Richmond in 51 or 52. After my father had been in and out of the service. And at that time, I had finished Howard in 1950,
Okay.
political science and economics. My undergraduate field was political science and economics.
Mhm.
I had wanted to be, when I was a youngster, a police officer, but then I realized later, watching Dick Trace and all those things, that police officers get killed. So I said, well, I've changed and let me be a detective.
Okay.
So then a few years later, as I was getting ready to graduate from high school, Mayo High School in Darlington, South Carolina,
Mm-hmm.
I said, nope, I don't want to be a detective. Maybe I'll be a lawyer. So my father told me you'd have to go to law school.
Mm-hmm.
And I then learned political science, and those kinds of courses would be it. So I went to Allen University in 1946.
Mm-hmm.
And after about 4, 5, 6 months on the campus there, I was a youngster, 16 years of age,
Mm-hmm.
I met several Kappas who were going to be, and then a few months later, they were the charter members of the Beta Rho chapter.
Okay.
That's when Beta Rho in 1946,
Mm-hmm.
early 47, got their charter.
Mm-hmm.
Columbia, South Carolina, which was my birth home, got their alumni chapter,
Mhm.
the Columbia alumni chapter of Kappa Alpha Psi. At the same time, they chartered the Beta Rho at Allen University.
Mm-hmm.
So I spent a year and a half at Allen and transferred to Howard
Okay.
because Allen did not have a political science major.
Mm-hmm.
And while at Allen, with the new group, the new bunch of charter members of Beta Rho, those guys were a serious bunch of Kappas, neophyte Kappas. All of them except 1 or 2 had just come in from or gotten out of the service in
Mhm.
World War II. And they were very serious-minded because they wanted to catch up with what they had lost while overseas and what have you. So
Right.
my experiences there at Beta Rho was not a lot of frivolity and craziness that we have seen come to pass.
Mhm.
I have seen come to pass that still persists. They were very studious.
Mm-hmm.
So when I came to Howard in '48, I ran into that same situation at Howard. You got a bunch of guys from World War II who'd been to Europe and different places. They were very, very serious on the campus
Mm-hmm.
about scholarship, about how meetings should be run, and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned about Robert Rules of Order.
Mm-hmm.
I got a cute little quick story on that Robert Rules of Order.
Okay.
A lot of the guys when I was at Allen and at Howard too were bigger than me. I was about 5'10" and I had 125 pounds. And I knew that when they were rebuffing whenever I was trying to boss them around, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't grab nobody in the collar. I was too thin and skinny. So I figured that the best way to deal with some of these guys, especially World War II guys, is learn parliamentary procedure. So when I go to my meetings,
Right.
I can be on an equal par. Point of order, brother Paul Mark, and I would pull the points out,
Mm-hmm.
and they would get stymied to a certain extent because I
Right.
studied very religiously all of the techniques.
Right. I have a couple questions for you before you continue. Now, going back to Beta Row, on your line, how many were on your line?
7 of us were on
Seven.
line.
And you, of course, were the youngest.
I was 6. I was 17. I had just turned 17 when I went in.
But didn't you tell them that you were 19?
No, I didn't tell them I was
Okay.
19. I told them I didn't tell them nothing. I called a point of order.
Oh, okay, okay. Okay, so now did you hold any offices in either Beta Row or Z chapters?
No off. Well, they had me listed as a strategist.
Okay.
I don't know why. I was skinny. 125 pounds, 30 pounds. That's about 6 feet. I was a strategist. I don't know why. But when I came to Howard
Mm-hmm.
and went to my first several meetings at Z chapter,
Mm-hmm.
I started getting active. And I became the parliamentarian at the end of about a year
Okay.
or so. And so, well, as one time assistant to the exchequer.
Okay.
So I spent my time doing parliamentary procedures.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of studied it, and I was taking courses at Howard in the undergrad school,
Mm-hmm.
political science. So
Mhm.
that's how I got really motivated from that standpoint in Kappa.
Okay, great. Now let me ask you a question. Let's kind of merge
Right.
your experience along with the time period where you were kind of your early years at Kappa. So I'm talking more about civil rights issues and things of that nature. Now, one thing a lot of brothers don't realize, younger brothers don't realize, is how much you older Kappas went through, your elder Kappas, I should say, went through as far as trying to conduct business as scholarly men, but at the same time, and in doing that, having to deal with some civil rights issues. So tell us about your first few conclaves. And I've heard stories from other brothers talking about how they had to stay certain places and they couldn't go to certain places and the conclave would be held certain places. I'm sure you have personal stories about that.
Okay. My first conclave, if my memory is correct,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, was 1954.
Okay.
I didn't go before 54 because I was in law school
Mm-hmm.
from 51 to 54 when I graduated,
Okay.
and I was being drafted. And when I first went down to the draft board, and from there to the recruiting office, even though I was being drafted, they took me down there with the others. I flunked the physical.
Okay.
And I asked the person at the draft board, Mrs. Carpenter, how I remember that name, I don't know. When I asked her, I said, look, what do I do next? This was in November of 54.
Okay.
She said, come back in December and
Mhm.
take the physical again. I said, no. I said, no. I had finished law school.
Right.
At that time, I finished law school in the summer of 54.
Mm-hmm.
I said, tell you what, I said, if you will put me off until January of 55,
Okay.
I'll get you some tickets to the Kappa closed ball and what have you, because I am a Kappa, and I was a member of Washington alumni because the Washington alumni allowed me to attend meetings and participate after I had just gotten out of law school without having to pay dues because I was still a student. So she said, okay. I said, and it wasn't a closed ball. Yes, it was the closed ball. So I got her those tickets, and then I was put off until January. So that's when I was able to attend the full conclave because I was in between a part-time job as a grade 3 miscellaneous office machine operator.
Oh, wow. With a law degree.
With 2 degrees, the BA from Howard and the JD from Georgetown. And all I could get at that time was that grade 3 clerk typist at the Bureau of Census. And while I was there, I finally got in. I had to talk my way in connection with the draft. I think I kind of regret that a little bit. But they were going to reject me again. And so I conned the chief medical officer at the recruitment place. Induction center, that's technically what it was. So they took me on in and sent me down to Fort Jackson. And from Fort Jackson to, for the physicals and stuff, and then they sent me there to Camp Gordon. And in Camp Gordon, I ran into nothing but discrimination. I was a recruit, of course, and they couldn't understand how this young black kid coming in here, E1, private, and has a law degree and from Georgetown and an undergrad degree and carrying a New York address on his records and yet finishing school, what have you, in Washington. So they got kind of shook up over that. They couldn't understand who I was and where I was coming from. So I managed to, I didn't manage to get into something. One of the officers, he was a first lieutenant. No, he was a second lieutenant, a white guy. At the evening session where we were coming from the rifle range, we were all lined up, came up to me and took his hand and pulled my T-shirt out of my coat and my shirt, regular shirt, and told me, you see that? You know what that is? I said, yes, my T-shirt. You want it? Because I did, he was going to kind of pull it and twist it. And then I didn't say a word. So then he walked behind me and kicked, I haven't told this story in years, and kicked the M1 rifle out of my hand. And every time I leaned over to try to pick it up, he would step on it. And when he did that, everybody, well, they didn't know what to say and do. And he carried on that kind of stuff for a while. And I could smell that he'd been drinking. He had beer or whatever it was. I could tell. We had all 100-odd troops there. So when I got back, we got back to the barracks. I spread the word that I was going to the IG the next day. And the guy said, well, you know, I said, I'm going to the IG, Inspector General. And so I did the next morning go over to the company orderly room and got permission to go to the IG. And this particular first sergeant who'd been on leave for a month or two said, look, he's a white guy. He had been an officer in World War II, warrant officer. And he was a very decent guy. He said, leave Lieutenant Cooper up to me. And he said, and I'll take care of it. If you don't, then you can go to the IG. So then he pulled me off of all the duties and everything that the others were doing. I was on KP every weekend for the first 6 weeks. They just couldn't understand who this guy was. And I used to hear at night in the barracks, the white guys more so than the blacks because there were not many of us, fighting the Civil War. And that came to me in the nature of a culture shock. I said, what are these guys doing? They were fighting the Civil War in the barracks, 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock. Ain't no good rebel but a dead rebel and all of that. Now, you know, we blacks, you ain't going to get involved into that kind of conversation that was going on. So briefly, I lived through that and then went to Basic Army Administration School. And I ran into some problems there. Discrimination and stuff. And so I got out of that. I mean, I graduated from that school. And they sent me to the 3rd Division in Fort Benning. The 3rd Division is the Combat Infantry Division. And they sent me, after having been in the Army now 10, 12 weeks, something like that, they sent me to the 10th